The ground didn't just shake, it groaned under the weight of iron and hoof. Samantha Miller stood alone on her porch, her knuckles white as she gripped the cold steel of her Winchester. On the ridge, they appeared like a dark storm cloud, descending against the setting sun. Not 5, not 10, but 50 Cherokee riders, painted for war. At the front rode Tall Bear, a man whose name was whispered in fear across the Wyoming territory. They hadn't come for gold. They hadn't come for cattle. They came for the bundle crying softly in Samantha's arms, and the town of Iron Creek was about to pay in blood for the secret she had uncovered. The winter of 1878 was not merely cold, it was predatory. In the high plains of the Wyoming territory, the wind didn't blow. It hunted, seeking out any crack in the chinking of a log cabin to freeze the marrow of those huddled inside. Samantha Miller wiped the condensation from the single pane of glass, looking out over the grey expanse of her homestead. At 32, Samantha possessed the kind of beauty that had been tempered by hardship, like iron forged in a hot coal fire. Her hands were rough from mending fences, and her eyes, the colour of wet slate, held the quiet sorrow of a woman who had buried a husband 2 years prior. Thomas had died of a fever, leaving her with 40 acres of scrub grass, a mule named Buster, and a stubborn refusal to move back east. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the snow in bruised shades of purple and charcoal. That was when she heard it. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the groaning of the timber. It was a high-pitched, rhythmic keening. Samantha stiffened. She grabbed the woolen shawl from the back of her rocking chair and cracked the heavy oak door. The sound cut through the biting air. A distinct, terrified wail. Then came the yipping. "Coyotes," she whispered, the word tasting like ash. The pack sounded close, perhaps 200 yards out by the dried creek bed. Usually, the coyotes stayed clear of the cabin, wary of the smell of gunpowder and dog. But hunger made bold beasts of them all. The wailing grew louder, followed by a snarling snap that made the hair on Samantha's neck stand up. She didn't think. Instinct, sharpened by 3 years of solitude, took over. She reached above the doorframe and pulled down the Henry repeating rifle Thomas had prized above all else. She checked the chamber, loaded, and stepped out into the knee-deep snow. "Get on!" she screamed, her voice cracking in the frozen air. She fired a shot into the sky. The crack echoed off the distant foothills. The yipping didn't stop. It grew frenzied. They had something cornered. Samantha ran. Her heavy boots crunched through the ice-crusted snow, her breath pluming before her like dragon smoke. As she crested the small rise leading to the creek, the scene unfolded with brutal clarity. 5 coyotes, their ribs showing through matted grey fur, were circling a dark bundle caught in the gnarled roots of a dead cottonwood tree. One of the beasts lunged, snapping at the bundle. The bundle moved, it rolled. It was a basket. A surge of adrenaline, hot and electric, flooded Samantha's veins. She leveled the Henry, exhaling a sharp breath to steady the barrel. She aimed for the alpha, a large male with a scarred ear who was inching closer to the woven reeds. Bang! The coyote dropped, kicking once before stilling. The others scattered instantly, dissolving into the sagebrush like ghosts. Samantha scrambled down the bank, slipping on the ice, nearly dropping the rifle. She reached the cottonwood tree and fell to her knees, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The basket was made of tightly woven sweetgrass and willow, traditional and sturdy, but the leather strap that should have secured it to a mother's back or a horse's saddle was sheared clean off. Not broken, but cut. Samantha pulled back the heavy buffalo hide covering the opening. A pair of dark, terrified eyes stared back at her. It was a baby boy, perhaps 6 months old, his skin the color of polished copper. He had stopped crying the moment the gunfire erupted, shocked into silence. "Oh, sweet mercy," Samantha breathed, her hands trembling as she reached in. The baby was wrapped in a blanket of intricate design, red and black wool with a pattern of thunderbirds beaded in turquoise along the hem. This was no trade blanket bought at the general store in Iron Creek. This was the work of a master artisan. Samantha looked around wildly. The snow around the creek bed was undisturbed save for the coyotes' tracks. There were no boot prints, no horse tracks. It was as if the sky had simply opened up and dropped the child into the wilderness. She pulled the baby, basket and all, into her arms. He was surprisingly heavy, but his face was gaunt, his lips parched and cracking. He let out a whimper, his small hand reaching up to grasp the rough wool of her coat. "I've got you," she whispered, scanning the darkening horizon. "I've got you." But as she turned to trudge back to the cabin, a glint of metal in the snow caught her eye. She paused, shifting the basket to her left hip, and bent down. It was a casing, not from her Henry rifle, and not from the rust-pitted revolvers usually carried by the drifters who passed through. It was a shiny brass cartridge from a brand-new Winchester 1873, the kind of expensive ammunition only wealthy men, or men on a government payroll, could afford. And a few feet away, half buried in a drift, lay a woman's moccasin. It was beaded to match the baby's blanket, but the leather was stained dark with blood that had long since frozen. Samantha realized then that this wasn't an abandonment. It was a crime scene. She clutched the baby tighter to her chest and ran for the cabin, bolting the heavy door behind her. She didn't light the lantern that night. She sat in the dark by the embers of the hearth, the rifle across her lap, listening to the wind and knowing, deep in her gut, that the coyotes were the least of her problems. For 3 days, the snow fell in relentless sheets, sealing the Miller homestead off from the rest of the world. In that time, the cabin transformed from a lonely outpost into a sanctuary. Samantha named him Sam, for lack of a better name, though she knew he had a true name given by his people. He was a fighter. He took the goat's milk she warmed by the fire with a voracious hunger, his small fingers gripping the spoon with surprising strength. As she bathed him on the second day, washing away the grime of the wild, she found a mark on his shoulder, a birthmark shaped vaguely like a paw print. But more telling was the talisman tied around his neck on a strip of rawhide, a small carving of a wolf made from black stone, polished smooth. Samantha stared at it. She had lived in the territory long enough to know the local tribes. The Arapaho were to the south, the Shoshone to the west. But the beadwork and the carving, this was Cherokee, and not just any Cherokee. The black wolf carving suggested a lineage of high standing. By the fourth morning, the storm broke. The sky turned a brilliant, hard blue. But with the clear weather came a new danger. Supplies were running low. The goat, a cranky nanny named Bessie, was drying up. She needed grain to keep producing milk, and she was out of flour for herself. She had to go to Iron Creek. The decision terrified her. If the baby had been lost during a skirmish, his father would be looking for him. But if the mother had been murdered, as the bloody moccasin suggested, then whoever did it might still be nearby. And if they found out the baby was alive, they would come to finish the job. She couldn't leave him alone, and she couldn't take him into town openly. The town of Iron Creek was not known for its tolerance. Under the leadership of Mayor Gideon Holt, the town had adopted a hardline stance against the native threat. Samantha devised a plan. She bundled the baby into the bottom of a large crate she used for hauling dry goods. She covered him with a thick layer of burlap sacks and piled loose hay on top, leaving small air pockets near the handles. "You have to be quiet, little one," she whispered, rocking the crate gently before loading it onto the buckboard wagon. Quiet as a mouse. The ride to town took 2 hours. The mule, Buster, plodded through the drifts, his breath steaming. As the buildings of Iron Creek came into view, raw lumber structures standing stark against the white plains, Samantha felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. The town was busier than usual. Men on horseback were gathered near the saloon, their voices loud and jagged. Samantha pulled the wagon up to the general store. She tied Buster to the rail and patted the crate. "Hush now," she murmured. She stepped inside the store. The bell above the door chimed, cutting through the low murmur of conversation. Elias Thorne, the shopkeep, looked up. He was a kindly man, but weak-willed. "Morning, Widow Miller. Didn't think you'd make it out in this drift." "We needed supplies, Elias," Samantha said, keeping her voice steady. 50 pounds of grain, 10 of flour, and do you have any canned milk? Bessie is running dry." Elias paused, his eyes darting to the men at the back of the store. Samantha followed his gaze. Standing by the pot-belly stove was Sheriff Jubal Early, a man with a face like tanned leather and eyes that missed nothing. Next to him stood a man Samantha loathed, Mayor Gideon Holt. Holt was a large man, dressed in a suit that cost more than Samantha's entire farm. He wore a heavy fur coat and smoked a cigar that smelled of expensive tobacco and rot. "Canned milk?" Holt asked, his voice booming. He stepped away from the stove, walking toward the counter. "I didn't know you had young ones out at the Miller place, Samantha." Samantha's heart slammed against her ribs. "I don't. It's for a calf. Weakling. Mother won't take to it." "A calf," Holt repeated. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's mighty tender-hearted of you. Most folks would just let nature take its course, especially in a winter like this." "I'm not most folks," Samantha said, placing a few coins on the counter. "Just the grain and flour, then, Elias. If you're out of milk." "We got milk," Elias said quickly, rushing to the shelves. "You hear the news, Samantha?" Sheriff Jubal asked, hooking his thumbs into his gun belt. He walked over, the spurs on his boots jingling softly. "I don't get much news out my way," she said, staring straight ahead. "Raiding party," Jubal said. "Couple of days back, a group of Indians crossed the treaty line. We intercepted them about 10 miles north of your place." Samantha's blood ran cold. 10 miles north. That was the creek bed. "Is that so?" she managed to say. "Aye," Holt interjected. "Dangerous business. We had to put them down. Regrettable, of course. But they were carrying contraband." "Contraband?" Samantha asked. "Stolen goods," Holt said, watching her face closely. "Gold, weapons, and rumors are they kidnapped a child from a settlement down south. We looked for the body, but the snow covered everything." Samantha felt the room spin. Kidnapped. It was a lie. A bold, horrific lie. The baby was Cherokee. The mother she had found evidence of was Cherokee. Holt was spinning a narrative to justify a massacre. "That's terrible," Samantha said, her voice hollow. "It is," Holt agreed. He leaned in closer, invading her space. "So if you see anything out there, footprints, or if you hear anything, you come to me, not the sheriff. Come to me directly. I'm offering a personal reward for the recovery of any property lost in the storm." The way he said property made Samantha want to retch. He wasn't looking for a lost white child. He was looking for the baby to ensure there were no witnesses to whatever butchery he had committed. Or worse, he wanted the baby for leverage. "I'll keep a lookout," Samantha said. Elias slammed the sacks of grain onto the counter. "That'll be $2, Samantha." She paid him, her hands shaking slightly. "Can you help me load this into the wagon? My back is aching." Sure, Elias said. As they walked out to the wagon, Holt followed them to the doorway. Samantha climbed onto the seat, trying not to look at the crate covered in hay. Elias tossed the grain into the back. It landed with a heavy thud right next to the crate. The crate jostled. A soft, muffled sound came from within. A whimper. Samantha froze. Elias froze. From the porch, Gideon Holt's eyes narrowed. He took the cigar out of his mouth. "What was that?" "One of the chickens," Samantha lied instantly, her voice sharp. "I brought a hen to trade, but changed my mind. She's broody." She snapped the reins. "Giddy up, Buster." The mule lurched forward. Samantha didn't look back. She kept her eyes on the road, but she could feel Holt's gaze burning a hole between her shoulder blades. She knew, with a terrifying certainty, that he didn't believe her. As the wagon rounded the bend, leaving the town behind, the baby began to cry in earnest. Samantha pulled the wagon to a halt behind a cluster of pines, checking to see if they were followed. The road was empty. For now. But she knew the clock had started ticking. Gideon Holt was a man who tied up loose ends, and she had just driven away with the loosest end of all. She looked down at the baby, who had quieted as she lifted him from the crate. "They're coming for us, little wolf," she whispered. "But let them come." She didn't know that 50 miles to the west, a man named Tall Bear had just found the bodies of his wife and guards. He found the empty basket, and he found the tracks of a mule wagon heading east. He didn't scream. He didn't weep. He simply mounted his horse, painted a black stripe across his face, and turned to his warriors. "We ride," Tall Bear said, "and we burn Iron Creek to the ground." The cabin felt different when Samantha returned. It was no longer a home. It was a fortress. The silence of the plains, once a comfort, now felt heavy, like a held breath waiting to be released. Samantha wasted no time. She unhitched Buster, slapping the mule on the rump to send him into the back paddock, where the scrub brush was thickest. If trouble came, she didn't want the animal caught in the crossfire. Inside, she barred the door with a thick oak beam she had hewn herself. She nailed shutters over the 2 small windows, leaving only slivers of light to aim a rifle through. The baby, little wolf, was awake. He sat on the buffalo rug near the hearth, his dark eyes tracking her frenetic movements. He didn't cry. It was as if he sensed the tension radiating off her, a small animal making itself invisible in the face of a predator. "We need to know why, little one," Samantha muttered, kneeling beside him. "Why would a man like Gideon Holt risk a federal hanging for a baby?" She picked up the blanket he had been wrapped in, the red and black wool with the thunderbirds. It was heavy, heavier than wool should be. Her fingers traced the hem. The stitching was immaculate, but along the bottom edge there was a slight irregularity in the seam. Samantha pulled a small knife from her boot. With surgical precision, she cut the thread. Inside the double layer of wool, folded into a tight square, was a sheet of parchment. Samantha unfolded it, her hands trembling. It was a document, stamped with the official seal of the Department of the Interior. It was a land patent, the Painted Rock Valley Treaty Amendment of 1876. Samantha's eyes scanned the cursive script. The text confirmed that the valley, including the land Iron Creek was built on, and the mountains to the west, had been granted in perpetuity to the clan of Tall Bear, a Cherokee leader who had moved his people west to avoid the reservations. The document explicitly stated that no white settlement could expand past the Red Clay River. Samantha gasped. Gideon Holt's town was illegal. The silver mines he had just opened in the foothills were on stolen land. If this document reached the U.S. Marshals in Cheyenne, Holt would lose everything, his town, his mines, and his fortune. He didn't just want to kill you, Samantha whispered to the baby, a cold realization settling in her gut. He wanted to bury the truth. The mother hadn't just been fleeing a massacre, she had been a courier, and she had died trying to save her people's future. A sharp crack from outside snapped Samantha's head up. It was the sound of a dry branch snapping under a heavy boot. Samantha blew out the lantern instantly, plunging the cabin into the grey gloom of the afternoon shadows. She crawled to the window, peering through the crack in the shutter. A lone rider sat on a roan gelding about 50 yards out. He wasn't wearing a sheriff's badge. He wore a long duster coat, dust-caked and worn, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. He sat with the casual arrogance of a man who killed for a living. Samantha recognized him. It was Clinton West. West was a regulator, a polite term for a hired killer who worked for the highest bidder. Rumor had it he had ridden with Quantrill's raiders during the war and hadn't stopped killing since. If Holt had sent Clinton West, he wasn't looking for an arrest. He was looking for an erasure. "Mrs. Miller!" West's voice carried easily across the snow, smooth and oily. "Seems you forgot your sack of sugar at the store. Mr. Holt sent me to ride it out to you." Samantha grabbed the Henry rifle. She didn't reply. "Now, I know you're in there, Samantha," West called out, walking his horse closer. "Chimney's smoking. Buster's fresh tracks are in the yard. Why don't you open up? It's mighty cold to be shouting." He was 30 yards away. "Leave the sugar on the stump and ride on, Mr. West," Samantha shouted back, her voice steady. "I'm not receiving company." West chuckled. It was a dry, rasping sound. "Now that's not neighborly. Mayor Holt is worried about that. Calf, you mentioned, wants to make sure it ain't sick." He was fishing. He needed confirmation before he made his move. "The calf is dead," Samantha lied. "Died an hour ago. You can tell Holt he wasted his time." West stopped his horse. The smile dropped from his face. "Is that a fact? Well, seeing as I'm here, I'll just come in and verify. City ordinance, health and safety." He swung his leg over the saddle and dropped into the snow. As his boots hit the ground, his hand hovered near the Colt Navy revolver on his hip. "Take another step, Clinton, and I'll bury you here," Samantha warned. She cocked the hammer of the Henry. The mechanical clack was loud enough to be heard outside. West froze. He tipped his hat back, revealing a face scarred by smallpox and eyes devoid of humanity. "You're making a mistake, Samantha. You're one woman in a wooden box. You think you can stop what's coming?" "I can stop you," she said. West moved fast. He dove to the right, behind the water trough, drawing his pistol in a blur of motion. Bang! His shot went wide, splintering the wood of the doorframe. Samantha didn't flinch. She tracked his movement through the slit in the shutter. She saw the top of his hat peek out from behind the trough. She aimed 3 inches lower, where his chest would be, right through the wood of the trough. The Henry roared. The heavy .44 caliber slug punched through the rotten wood of the trough, and the water exploded in a spray of ice and splinters. A grunt of pain echoed, followed by a curse. "You crazy witch!" West scrambled back, clutching his side. He fired 2 wild shots at the cabin, shattering the glass behind the shutter, then ran for his horse. He vaulted into the saddle with a groan, wheeling the horse around. "You're dead, Miller!" he screamed, blood dark on his duster. "You hear me? You're all dead." He kicked the horse into a gallop, riding hard back toward Iron Creek. Samantha watched him go, her heart pounding in her ears. She hadn't killed him. That was a mistake. A wounded wolf always brings the pack. She turned to the baby. Little Wolf was staring at her, his tiny hand clutching the wooden wolf talisman. "We have to move," Samantha said, her voice trembling. "They'll be back by sundown, and they won't come to talk." But as she looked out the back window, at the deep, waist-high snow leading into the mountains. She knew they couldn't run. With a baby, in this freeze, without a wagon, they would freeze to death in a few hours. The cabin was the only shelter. It was the only cover. She had to stand her ground. Samantha went to the loose floorboard in the bedroom and pulled up her husband's old ammunition box. She had 3 boxes of rifle rounds, a jar of black powder, and a rusted shotgun. She began to load. Night fell like a hammer. The sky was a void, the moon obscured by drifting clouds. Samantha had positioned herself in the loft of the cabin, lying prone on the rough planks. From here, she had a vantage point of the entire clearing. She had placed the baby in the root cellar beneath the kitchen floor. It was cold down there, but she had lined a crate with every blanket she owned and placed a heated stone wrapped in flannel at his feet. If they burned the house, well, the cellar was earthen. It was his best chance. The waiting was the hardest part. The wind howled around the eaves, sounding like voices. Every shifting shadow looked like a man creeping through the snow. Then she saw them. They didn't come with torches. They came in the dark, seeking to catch her unaware, shadows detaching themselves from the tree line. Samantha counted 6, 8, 12 men. Gideon Holt wasn't taking chances. He had brought a posse. Leading them was a man on a large white horse, Holt himself. Even in the dark, his bulk was unmistakable. Beside him rode Clinton West, slumped in the saddle, bandaged but still upright. They stopped just out of effective rifle range. "Samantha Miller!" Holt's voice boomed. "This has gone far enough. Send out the child and you can walk away. You have my word as mayor." Samantha rested her cheek against the stock of the rifle. "Your word is worth less than snake oil, Gideon," she shouted back. "I have the treaty. I know about the valley." Silence stretched across the clearing. The mention of the treaty changed everything. Now it wasn't just about a baby. It was about their lives. If she lived to show that paper to a judge, Holt would hang. "Burn it," Holt commanded, his voice cold and flat. "Burn it all." The men dismounted. Samantha saw the flare of matches. Torches were lit, casting long, dancing shadows across the snow. Samantha took a deep breath. She aimed at the nearest man holding a torch. Crack! The man crumpled, the torch falling into the snow with a hiss. "Open fire!" Holt screamed. The night erupted. A dozen rifles opened up at once. Bullets slammed into the log walls, punching through the chinking, shattering the remaining crockery on the shelves. The noise was deafening, a continuous roar of thunder. Samantha stayed low, crawling to a different knothole. She fired again, dropping a man who was rushing the porch. She worked the lever of the Henry with mechanical rhythm. Fire, rack, fire, rack. She was a ghost in the rafters, moving constantly so they couldn't pin her down. But there were too many of them. "Get to the back," she heard West yell. "Break the door." She heard the heavy thud of a ram against the back door. The wood groaned. Samantha scrambled to the rear of the loft. She leaned over the edge, aiming down through a gap in the floorboards at the back door. She fired blindly through the wood. A scream of pain told her she had connected. But the smell of smoke was rising. They had thrown oil-soaked rags onto the roof. The cedar shingles were catching. "It's over, Samantha!" Holt yelled, his voice closer now. "Come out and die like a Christian woman." Samantha's eyes watered from the smoke. She had 10 rounds left. The heat was building above her. She coughed, the sound racking her body. She thought of the baby in the cellar. "I'm sorry," she thought. "I tried." She prepared to descend the ladder, to make her last stand over the trap door of the cellar. She would kill as many as she could before they took her. She swung her legs over the loft edge. And then, the ground shook. It wasn't a metaphor. The bottles on the shelf rattled. The very timbers of the cabin vibrated. The shooting outside faltered. "What is that?" she heard one of Holt's men yell. "Is that a train? There ain't no tracks here," another shouted, panic edging his voice. The rumbling grew louder, a deep, rhythmic pounding that was felt in the chest more than heard. It was the sound of a landslide, the sound of an avalanche, the sound of 500 hooves. Samantha dragged herself back to the front window. On the ridge to the east, silhouetted against the sudden break in the clouds where the moon shone through, they appeared. They did not ride in a disorganized mob. They sat in a long, terrifying line that spanned the entire crest of the hill. 50 riders. Their horses were painted with circles of lightning and hail. The riders wore heavy buffalo coats and carried lances and Winchesters. At the center sat a giant of a man on a coal-black stallion. He wore a war bonnet of eagle feathers that trailed down the side of his horse. His face was painted with a single black stripe across the eyes. Tall Bear. Below, in the yard, Gideon Holt's men froze. The torches wavered in their hands. "Cherokee!" someone screamed. Tall Bear raised his lance. He didn't shout a war cry. He didn't make a sound. He simply dropped the lance tip toward the cabin. The ridge exploded into motion. The 50 riders descended like a dark tide. The sound was apocalyptic. The scream of horses, the thunder of hooves, and then the high-pitched, terrifying war trills of the Cherokee warriors. Holt's men panicked. They turned their guns from the cabin to the onrushing storm. But they were cowhands and bullies, not soldiers, and they were facing men who had been fighting the U.S. cavalry for a decade. Samantha watched, mesmerized as the wave hit. It wasn't a battle, it was a reckoning. The Cherokee riders swept through the yard, firing from the hip with deadly accuracy. Holt's men were cut down where they stood. Clinton West tried to mount his horse, but a warrior leaped from his own pony, tackling the gunman into the snow. A knife flashed in the moonlight. West didn't get up. Gideon Holt, screaming orders that no one obeyed, fired his revolver wildly. He managed to hit a warrior's horse, bringing it down. That was a mistake. 3 riders converged on the mare. They didn't shoot him. They swung their war clubs, heavy stone heads wrapped in rawhide. Holt was knocked from his saddle like a rag doll. He hit the ground and was trampled by the passing horses. The gunfire died down as quickly as it had started. The only sounds left were the groans of the dying and the heavy snorting of the war ponies. The cabin was still burning on the roof. Samantha coughed, realizing the danger hadn't passed. She was still a white woman in a burning house surrounded by a war party that had just slaughtered every white man in sight. The front door of the cabin was kicked open. Samantha leveled her empty rifle at the ladder. Heavy footsteps crunched on the floorboards below. A figure appeared at the bottom of the ladder, looking up. It was the giant, Tall Bear. Up close, he was terrifying. His face was a mask of granite, his eyes dark pools of fury. He held a Winchester in one hand and a bloody tomahawk in the other. He looked at Samantha, huddled in the loft. He looked at the rifle in her hands. "Where is he?" Tall Bear asked. His voice was deep, scraping like rocks grinding together. He spoke perfect English. Samantha swallowed, her throat raw from smoke. She pointed a shaking finger toward the kitchen floor. "The cellar. He's safe. The roof is burning." Tall Bear didn't kill her. He didn't even blink. He holstered his tomahawk and strode to the kitchen. He ripped the trap door open with one hand. He reached down. A moment later, he straightened up. In his large, blood-stained hands, he held the bundle. Little Wolf let out a sharp cry. Tall Bear looked at the baby. The fury in his face shattered, replaced by an expression of such raw, agonizing relief that Samantha felt tears prick her own eyes. He pressed his forehead against the baby's blanket, closing his eyes for a brief second. Then he looked back up at Samantha. "Get down," he commanded. "The roof is falling." Samantha scrambled down the ladder. The heat was intense now. Tall Bear waited for her. He didn't offer a hand, but he didn't leave her behind. He kicked the back door open, shattering the lock that West's men had damaged, and stepped out into the cold night air. Samantha stumbled out after him, gasping for the clean air. The yard was a graveyard. Bodies lay scattered in the snow. The Cherokee warriors sat on their horses in a ring around the cabin, silent, watching their chief. Tall Bear walked to the center of the yard. He held the baby up to the moonlight. A unified shout went up from the 50 riders, a sound of victory and reclamation. Tall Bear lowered the baby and turned to face Samantha. He towered over her. "You are the one who fired the first shot," he said. "It wasn't a question. We heard the rhythm of your gun from the valley." "They wanted to kill him," Samantha said, her voice shaking but defiant. "They killed his mother. I found her moccasin." Tall Bear's face tightened. "I know. We found her body." He looked at the burning cabin. Samantha's home. Everything she owned was being consumed by the flames. "You have no shelter," Tall Bear said. "I have my life," Samantha replied, "and he has his father." Tall Bear looked at her for a long moment, assessing her. He looked at the dead men. Men he knew were his enemies, killed in part by this white woman's hand. "You saved the son of the Cherokee," Tall Bear said solemnly. "You fought the white chief to keep him safe." He signaled to one of his warriors, a young man with a scar on his chin. The warrior rode forward, leading a spare horse, a sturdy paint with a high saddle. "Mount," Tall Bear said to Samantha. "Where are you taking me?" Samantha asked, clutching her empty rifle. "The soldiers will come when they see the fire," Tall Bear said, swinging onto his black stallion with the baby settled securely in one arm. "If they find you here, they will hang you for helping us, or they will think we took you." He looked toward the mountains. "You ride with us, Samantha Miller. Tonight, you are not white. Tonight, you are the wolf mother." Samantha looked at the burning cabin, then at the hand Tall Bear extended to help her mount the paint horse. She looked at the dead body of Gideon Holt. There was nothing left for her in Iron Creek but a rope or a jail cell. She took the reins. The journey into the Painted Rock Valley was a blur of exhaustion. Samantha Miller rode amidst the warriors, her body aching, guided only by the flanks of the riders pressing in around her. They arrived at the winter camp just as dawn broke, a hidden fortress shielded by granite cliffs dotted with teepees. As the column descended, the camp came alive. Women and elders emerged, seeing the riderless horses of the fallen. And then they saw Samantha. Silence rippled through the crowd like a cold wind. To them, she was a ghost, a demon, a representative of the people who hunted them. Tall Bear dismounted and held the bundle, his son, high in the air. "The blood of my blood returns," he bellowed. "He lives." A wail of joy went up, but it was cut short as Tall Bear pointed to Samantha. "This woman fought the white Chief Holt. She burned her own lodge to save my son. She is under my protection. No hand shall be raised against her." He handed the baby to his mother, Walking Bird, and turned to Samantha. "You will stay in the lodge of the healers. Do not try to leave." For 3 weeks, Samantha lived in a world of isolation. Though safe, she was the Unaka, the white one. When she walked to the stream, conversations stopped. Her only connection was the baby, now named Wire, Wolf. Walking Bird reluctantly allowed Samantha to hold him when he fussed, for Samantha was the only one who knew the lullabies he craved. But the tension in the camp was shifting. The warriors were restless. They knew the war was coming. One evening, Tall Bear entered the healer's lodge. He looked tired, the burden of leadership heavy on his shoulders. He sat across from her, staring into the fire. "The scouts say blue soldiers are gathering," he said quietly. "Major Kincaid. They bring wagon guns." "They are coming for the land," Samantha said. "Holt is dead, but the hunger of your people remains. They believe we are savages squatting on gold." Samantha remembered the heavy wool blanket. She had kept the document hidden in her corset since the night of the fire, terrified it would be destroyed by someone who didn't understand its power. "They don't just believe it," Samantha said, reaching into her dress. "They are lying about it." She pulled out the parchment. The official seal of the Department of the Interior caught the firelight. Tall Bear frowned. "What is this?" "A land patent," Samantha said, smoothing it out. "I found it sewn into Wyer's blanket. His mother. She wasn't just hiding him. She was hiding this." She looked up at him. "It says President Grant signed this 2 years ago. The Painted Rock Valley belongs to you, forever. It implies that Iron Creek is illegal. The mines are illegal. The army is supposed to be protecting you." Tall Bear sat back, stunned. The realization washed over him. His wife hadn't just died for a baby. She had died for a nation. "If the soldiers see this," Tall Bear asked, "will they stop? If their commander is a good man?" "Yes," Samantha said. "If he is corrupt, he will burn this paper and kill us all to hide it." Tall Bear stood up, the warrior energy returning to his limbs. "Then we must be ready to fight, not just with bullets, but with this truth." He looked at Samantha, and for the first time, the wall between them crumbled. He didn't see a white woman. He saw a warrior who had brought him the weapon he needed most. "You have given me my son," Tall Bear said softly. "Now you give me my land. You are no longer Unaka. You are Gildale, friend." The thaw came with a deceptive gentleness. The snow melted into rushing rivulets, turning the mountain passes into mud. But with the clear roads came the sound of bugles. Major Thaddeus Kincaid did not look like a monster. He looked like a gentleman. He sat atop a high-stepping bay horse, his uniform immaculate. But his eyes were the color of shallow water, pale, cold, and indifferent. He brought 200 men of the 5th Cavalry, and as the scouts had warned, he brought a mountain howitzer, a cannon capable of shattering a barricade from a mile away. Samantha stood on the ridge overlooking the valley entrance, lying prone beside Tall Bear and Red Hawk. "That is Major Kincaid," Samantha whispered, lowering the spyglass. "They call him the Hammer. He doesn't negotiate. He clears." 200, Red Hawk spat. "We have 40 fighting men. We cannot hold the pass." "We don't have to hold it forever," Samantha said, her mind racing. "We just need to stall them. If I can get the patent to the federal judge in Cheyenne, Kincaid can't touch you. It would be murder." "Cheyenne is 4 days away," Tall Bear said. "Kincaid will be here in 2 hours." "Then we buy 4 days." Samantha pointed to a narrow bend in the canyon, known as the Devil's Throat. "The walls there are loose shale. If we use the black powder from the mines, the powder Holt's men were carrying, we can drop the cliff face behind the first troop and in front of the cannon." Tall Bear smiled, a wolf's smile. "We trap the head and cut off the tail." The preparations were frantic. Samantha worked alongside the warriors, hauling kegs of stolen blasting powder up the goat paths. By noon, the trap was set. Major Kincaid rode into the Devil's Throat with the confidence of a man who had never lost. He saw the empty valley ahead and signaled the advance. "Steady, men," Kincaid's voice drifted up. "Keep your eyes on the tree line." Samantha lay behind a boulder, her Henry rifle resting on the rock. Her heart hammered against the cold stone. She was about to fire upon the flag she had been born under. They aren't soldiers, she told herself. They are hired guns for a dead criminal. When the main body of the cavalry passed the marked rock, Tall Bear raised his hand. Red Hawk shot a flaming arrow into the fuse buried in the shale. Boom! The explosion was deafening. The cliff face sheared off, thousands of tons of rock crashing down onto the road, sealing the rear of the column off from the supply wagons and the cannon. "Now!" Tall Bear screamed. The Cherokee warriors didn't charge. Following Samantha's advice, they stayed high in the rocks, raining fire down into the trapped column. Samantha looked through her sights, saw a corporal raising his carbine, and squeezed the trigger. The corporal fell. She felt a cold, hard clarity. This was survival. But Kincaid was a veteran. "Dismount! Form a perimeter!" he roared. The soldiers took cover behind dead horses and fallen rocks, returning disciplined fire. Suddenly, a bugle sounded from the other side of the rockfall, where the cannon was trapped. "Sir!" a soldier yelled from below. "They are bringing the gun around. There is a goat path." Samantha cursed. She hadn't seen the secondary trail. "Tall Bear, if they set that howitzer up on the north ridge, they will blast us off these cliffs in minutes." Tall Bear looked at the steep, unguarded north ridge. "I will take 5 men." "No," Samantha said, grabbing his arm. "You are the chief. If you fall, the warriors break. I'm the only one small enough to climb the chimney chute to get there in time. Give me cover. I'll stop the gun." Tall Bear looked at the soot on her face and the resolve in her grey eyes. "Go, take Red Hawk." Samantha slung her rifle and ran for the fissure. The climb was brutal, tearing her fingernails as she clawed up the vertical shaft. Above, she heard the creak of wheels and men shouting. She pulled herself over the ledge just as the soldiers swung the gun around. There were 4 artillerymen. Samantha didn't have time to be subtle. She raised her rifle. Bang! The gunner holding the linstock fell. The others spun around, shocked to see a woman in a torn dress rising from the earth. "It's a woman! Don't shoot! Shoot her, you fool!" the sergeant roared. Samantha fired again, hitting the sergeant. Red Hawk vaulted over the ledge, his tomahawk taking down the 3rd man. The 4th man, a young private, scrambled back, hands up. "I surrender! I surrender!" Samantha ignored him, rushing to the cannon. She grabbed the heavy iron linstock from the ground, jammed it into the vent of the cannon, and hammered it down with her rifle butt, breaking it off flush. The gun was spiked, useless. But as she turned, a shot rang out. Samantha felt a punch in her shoulder, spinning her around. She hit the ground, the sky swirling. The young private who had surrendered stood there, shaking, smoke curling from a hidden pistol. I had to," he stammered. Red Hawk roared, a sound of pure primal rage, and lunged. Samantha's vision greyed. She heard the distant cheering of the warriors as they realized the gun was silenced. She lay back against the wheel of the useless cannon, clutching her bleeding shoulder. "We bought the time," she whispered to the empty sky. "Now, someone has to ride." Pain was a living thing, a hot iron pressed against Samantha's shoulder with every lurch of the travois. For 2 days, they had moved through the foothills, racing the clock. Kincaid's engineers were building a ramp at the Devil's Throat. The Cherokee scouts estimated they had less than 24 hours before the 5th Cavalry poured into the valley. Tall Bear halted the column near the old stage road. He looked haggard, his eyes scanning the horizon. "We are close to the White Road," he said, his voice low. "My warriors cannot go further. If we ride into Cheyenne, we will be shot before we speak." Samantha gritted her teeth, forcing herself to sit up. The world spun, grey and nauseating, but she reached into her bodice. The oilskin packet was still there, the shield that would save them all. "Help me onto the horse," Samantha rasped. "You are too weak," Tall Bear argued, though his eyes held a desperate hope. "I didn't come this far to die in a sled," she snapped. "Put me on the horse, Tall Bear, and give me a revolver. If I run into Kincaid's scouts, I won't be taken alive." Tall Bear didn't waste words. He lifted her easily, placing her in the saddle of the sturdy paint horse. He pressed his own heavy dragoon pistol into her good hand. "Ride with the wind, Wolf Mother," he said. There was no handshake, just a look of profound, shared sacrifice. Samantha kicked the horse into a gallop. She didn't look back. The ride to Cheyenne was a blur of delirium. Samantha drifted in and out of consciousness, kept upright only by the rawhide strip she had knotted to the saddle horn. She hallucinated Thomas riding beside her. She saw the burning cabin and Wire's dark eyes. But the rhythm of the hooves kept her anchored to the living world. She arrived in Cheyenne at sunset on the second day. She looked like a revenant, dress torn and blood-stained, hair a matted tangle, face gaunt as a skull. As she rode down the main thoroughfare, the bustle of the city died. Men in suits and ladies in silk dresses froze on the boardwalks, staring at the spectre from the wilderness. She rode straight to the brick building with the flag snapping in the wind. The federal courthouse. She slid from the saddle, legs collapsing. A clerk rushed down the steps. "Ma'am, someone fetch the sheriff." "No sheriff," Samantha croaked, gripping the man's lapel. "The judge, take me to him." They half-carried her up the stairs. She pushed through the double doors, interrupting a land dispute case. The room went silent. Judge Halloway, a stern man with mutton chop whiskers, looked over his spectacles. "What is the meaning of this interruption?" Halloway demanded, gavel poised. Samantha stumbled forward, shaking off the bailiff. She slammed the oilskin packet onto the defense table. "Major Kincaid," she gasped, the room swimming, "is about to massacre 50 people on land that belongs to them by the president's own hand." She ripped the oilskin open. The parchment, stained with the blood of Wire's mother and the sweat of Samantha's fever, unrolled. The gold seal of the United States caught the gaslight. "The Painted Rock Valley Treaty," she whispered. "It's not open range, Judge. It's private property." Halloway motioned for the paper. He read in silence. The court held its breath. When he looked up, his face had drained of color. "This is a verified land patent," Halloway announced, his voice booming. "Signed by President Grant. It explicitly forbids military entry into the red clay sector." He looked at Samantha. "Where is Kincaid?" "Devil's Throat," she managed. "He has a howitzer." Halloway turned to the U.S. Marshal. "Telegraph Fort Laramie. Have General Crook issue a cease and desist immediately, and ride yourself. If Kincaid fires a single shot after this moment, I will have him hanged for murder." "Yes, Your Honor." The Marshal sprinted from the room. Samantha felt the tension that had held her upright finally snap. As the darkness rushed in, the last thing she heard was the judge calling for a doctor. The standoff at the Devil's Throat ended not with a bang, but with a piece of paper. The Marshal arrived just as the 5th Cavalry was loading the cleared howitzer. Major Kincaid, red-faced and trembling with suppressed rage, read the telegram. He looked at the valley, then at the patent copy. He was a hard man, but he was an officer who feared a court-martial. He saluted stiffly, ordered the retreat, and marched his men away. Samantha recovered slowly. It took a month before she could walk without a cane. Cheyenne hailed her as a hero, the plucky widow who stood up to corruption. A wealthy rancher even offered to marry her. But Samantha found the noise of the city unbearable. The air smelled of coal smoke. The people's smiles didn't reach their eyes. One morning, she packed a saddlebag and bought a new Winchester 1876. She didn't ride east to her family in Ohio. She turned west. When she reached the Painted Rock Valley, the snow had melted. Wildflowers covered the scars of the battle. A sentry signaled her approach, and she rode into the camp. It was unchanged, timeless. Tall Bear stood outside his lodge, holding a toddler by the hand. Wire, now walking, clutching the wooden wolf talisman. Tall Bear didn't smile, but his eyes softened. The white world did not keep you? The white world is too small, Samantha replied, dismounting. Wire toddled forward, tilting his head. Recognition sparked in his dark eyes. He reached out a chubby hand. Samantha dropped to her knees in the dust, ignoring the ache in her shoulder, and pulled the boy into her arms. He smelled of smoke and sweet grass. "I am home," she whispered. She stayed. She never married Tall Bear, though they were soulmates in spirit. She became the auntie, the teacher, the bridge between two worlds. She taught Wire to read the laws of the white man so he could fight in the courts, and she taught him to shoot so he could fight in the hills. They called her Wire Gilderly, the wolf's friend. Years later, when Samantha finally passed, they did not bury her in the churchyard. They wrapped her in a red and black blanket with thunderbirds beaded on the hem, and they laid her to rest high in the granite cliffs. The coyotes still howl in the Wyoming nights. But if you listen closely, the locals say you can hear a different sound carried on the wind, the sharp crack of a Henry rifle guarding the pass, forever watching over the pack. And that is the legend of Samantha Miller, the woman who stood between an army and a child, proving that sometimes the strongest weapon in the West wasn't a Winchester. It was the truth. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? If you were in that cabin, hearing those coyotes howl, would you have opened the door? Samantha Miller did, and she changed history. If you enjoyed this story, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a saga. I've got plenty more tales of outlaws and heroes coming your way. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the trail.